Thanks, Joe. So I just finished talking about the ambassador program, which is an effort developed by youth for youth to help encourage leadership in all kinds of areas that might be important: DEI, legislation, education, social media, voter registration, all of those specific projects. But we
Oh,
as an organization have two projects underway. Well, had one underway that's finished and have another one underway. One of them was a voter registration project that started last spring and went through October 15th, which was the voter registration deadline this year. The Department of Education, the Department of State, Energizing Young Voters, and as also the League of Women Voters, because Energizing Young Voters asked for the league across the state to get involved, worked really hard to get schools to follow the law, to get young people, give young people who were eligible to vote the opportunity in school to register, and to give them the opportunity in school to learn about voting. So they had education and registration requirements at the state level, and the Department of Education put some pressure on the school districts this year to do it. The Department of State collected the data for us. So they collected data in May, which was um, by the date of the primary election deadline up through October 15th. So from the May date to the beginning of school this year, the number of voters, young voters, 17 and 18 years old, doubled from 45,549 on May 17th to 82,943 on October 18th. And just from September 20th, so we're 2 weeks into the school year, September 20th through October 18th, we had 13,000 new 17 and 18-year-old registrations. So that was a project. It was highly successful, and I'm delighted because of the two other agencies that became involved and who are now committed to working with energizing young voters. So that's very exciting. The other one is a Title I project where we have identified schools that the Department of Education, which runs the Title I, which funds Title I programs in local schools. They give money to schools for two reasons. One is because the school is low achieving, and one is because it's low income and needs additional support. So we identified the low income schools, and this is something that applies across the nation. It's not just New Jersey. Low income schools were identified, and then we used data from Tufts University's program that analyzes youth voter turnout to identify those schools that were low income, that were also low voter turnout and high population, because that was going to be the ripest group to put our efforts into. And I think because we did that is one of the reasons that the numbers just blew up the way they did from May to October. If you're interested in something like that, I can talk with you separately, but I just wanted you to know that that did happen and that I think it's a wonderful program. It's ongoing. The effort is being made to target those schools with the voter education and the voter registration that we do. Okay, as far as our teaching materials go, everything in them has been very carefully researched. There are occasional mistakes, but those are corrected. There are occasional things where it might appear to be lean one way left, or it might appear to lean right. But when that happens, we make a diligent effort to change it so that everything that we have is accurate, transparent, and is adaptable. The lean left and lean right, every time I personally go in to teach a lesson, I ask the class if there's something that you hear or feel is leaning one way or the other. Please let me know, because we need to know that. And I ask the teachers that too. And we've had two things come up. One was a group of students at Rowan University in the southern part of the state. We have a slide that you'll see tonight that has a whole series of issues listed on like starbursts. And one of those was gun control. And they said to me, can't put that on that slide. And in my naivete, I said, why? And they said, because to me, that would say gun rights. And I went, you're absolutely right. So how do we fix it? We left it up to the kids. They said, just take the word off, just leave guns, because then people on both sides will assume that it is what they're thinking of. And the other one was pointed out by a group of teachers. It's not in tonight's presentation, but we have a series on civic engagement, and the kids are at one point watch videos to try to determine leadership qualities that they can see in other young people. What is it that makes them leaders? And the teachers pointed out all of those issues are left-leaning issues. I said, yep, you're right. Again, so we had to do some scraping around, and we finally found that there were two left and two right issues that we found comparable, powerful leadership among young people. So those are now in the thing, but we will continue to do that. So if you, as we're going through it, see any mistakes, please let me know. And please let me know if it tends to lean one way or the other. One of the other things is that when you're using these, because you are from very different parts of New Jersey, very different parts of the country, it's really important to know that you can adapt these materials for your setting. So if Barbara Erickson, for example, is going to use this in the state of Washington, she's not going to put anything in it. She's going to take out the slides that talk about New Jersey's voter registration requirements and replace that with things that are appropriate for Washington. There are states, and I think Washington is one of them, Barbara, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but where everybody votes by mail. So if we talk about two different ways of voting, that kind of thing needs to be adjusted. You are free to do that. We do ask you, though, that you stick to the script pretty much, because we know that script is effective. So we don't want you to, like when we're talking about the timeline of suffrage, don't bring in the fact that your grandfather fought in World War II and you've got medals and things like that. That distracts from the message that we are trying to get across. So that's what we're looking for. Keep distractions away. Keep the message that's in the slideshow and the script up front and central. And the last thing that I want to tell you before we actually start is that we've been trying to create the slideshows so that they can be used with multilingual audiences. And there are a couple of ways that we've been doing that. Sometimes we've had them actually translated, and you will see the translated version on our website, and I'll show you that when we get into the website. Sometimes one of the things that we've done is for one of our presenters is to buy one of the like tour guide kits where you've got a microphone that one person can speak into, and then there are earpieces that the students can listen to. And if there is a translator in the classroom, a simultaneous translator, like if it's an ESL class or something like that, you can use those and the kids will hear it. The other thing that we have just learned is that if you use the slideshow as a PowerPoint, there is an option on a PowerPoint slideshow to have subtitles created on the bottom of the screen. And so even if you are speaking in English, as long as you're close enough to the microphone of the computer, or you have a microphone that can connect with the computer, the kids will see the subtitles. So those are three options. If you can come up with more, we would love to hear about them, because we do want to make sure that we are not only reaching English-speaking students, that there are plenty of people whose first language is not English who are eligible to vote and should also have the same information that we have. Okay. Any questions now before we start? Okay. So I am going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to take you to the website as soon as I get rid of this. There we go. All right, Energizing Young Voters website is now about 6 years old, and we're talking about making some changes to it, but the changes aren't going to happen quickly. So this is what you will be using when when and if you decide that you're going to be presenting a slideshow. So this is the home page. And what you want to look at is the what we do. And if you're going to be presenting, or if you want to share with somebody who would be, you go to the Educators and Community Groups page. When you get to that page, you can scroll down and you will see the lessons that we have available to anyone who wants to use them. With the plus sign, there's a drop down that gives you a very brief description of what the lesson is actually about. And then there's a section that says view module, and then there's a section that says view training video. Now, after tonight, probably a week from now, that training video will be what we're using, what we're creating right now. What's on there now is the last one when I remembered to hit the record button. So that's true for each one of these lessons, a description, the module, and then the training video. Tonight, we're going to be doing the timeline of suffrage and the truth about turnout. So I'm going to go to view module, which is what you would do. And here you have a number of folders. The slideshow and the script is what you're going to see me use tonight. But there is a version in Spanish. The whole thing is there, all of the cards, all of the script, the slideshow. And there are state modifications that are here already. So the people in Montana created one, and they added a section on the difficulty that indigenous tribes had in gaining the right to vote. And they're actually considering making a whole module on that because it's a much more complicated history than I was aware of. That's another thing. That was a student that pointed out that some of the information that we had about indigenous populations really should be modified. The way we were saying it was not as accurate as this young man wanted it to be. We also have it, Colorado has created their own. And you'll see here that their background is very different from the one that I'm going to be using tonight. That's the kind of modification that you can make without losing the value of the slideshow. So don't be afraid to update visually. Just make sure that if you use an image, that it is an image that is free to use. We have already been fined once because there was an image used that we didn't even realize was not free, that there was a license for it. And apparently there are little bots that run around the internet and find those things and then come after you and charge you for them. So at any rate, back to the slideshow. So we were, all right, I was at Colorado. All right, so going back to the state modifications. All right, now, if you want to do it for yourself for a different state, there is a make it for your state template. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can use that and then modify it for the things that you need to change for your own state. Okay, using the timeline of suffrage, we use avatars. And I'm going to show you this because you can see down the side, you'll see that there are, I think, 50 different avatars. And each one of those, like George, has a list of characteristics that will allow George to vote at a different period in our history. This particular one has citizen here. It shouldn't. This was, I'm going to have to change that because at the time, it wasn't until the Civil War and the amendments that came about as a result of that, that the word citizen was actually used in the Constitution. Before that, there were assumptions made about citizenship, but nobody was designated a citizen. So that's something that you should know. We will assign you tonight an avatar, but I'm going to have to tell you what the characteristics are because I'm making you my experimental group for now. Going back to this, how do you distribute those? The important thing in the avatar game is what you want to have happen is you want people to realize what a small percentage of the population was actually able to vote at different periods of time in history. In order to do that, you have to assign the avatars based on those percentages. So in the file about avatars, what I've done is to give you a chart that shows you what percentage of the class or the group that you're working with should fall into each one of those categories. So back in the Revolutionary War, you had to be a white male, 21 or older, and a property owner. So 10% of the class should have avatars that are like that. 15% should be white males and 21 or up, because that's what happened at the end of the westward movement. Another 15 should be males 21 and up, because that's when Black men were given the right to vote. 40% of the population should be females and 21 years and up. And then 10% should be 18 and up, and then 5% and 5% would be under 18 and not a citizen. So that's roughly it. That's nice and easy if you've got something, something like a class of 30 people, when it's relatively easy to divide those up. It's not always that simple. So what I've done is to make schemas. So if you have a class of 10 people, these are the avatars that I would assign. 15, these are the avatars. And then likewise, 20 and 25 and 30. So it's pretty much done for you. When I teach this remotely, normally I send each participant the name of the avatar and the characteristics of that avatar ahead of time. But I've learned with our presentations that, like tonight, 26 people are signed up, but 15 people actually come, and the others know they're going to get the recording. And so that's what they're depending on. So I had to wait until tonight to find out that there were 15 of us. And so that's why I'm going to do things a little bit differently with us tonight.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think the categories were white male, over 21, white male, property owner, over 21, white male, over 21, male. Does that mean person of color, male?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And
Is that
let me show you this again. Good question. All right. So all the way down to, let's see. Uh, okay, all the way down to Abe Lincoln, you're going to have people who will fit into that category, and you have a few more too. But once you start getting to number 7, then you start seeing that this person doesn't own property. So you would assign and I put little keys down in the lower left. So anybody who is an A fits into that first category of white male, 21 or older, and owns property. Anyone who's a B is a white man, 21 or older, doesn't have to own property. Anyone who is a C is a black man, or yes, a black man. I think there's one. Latino man, 21 or older, who doesn't own property or can own property at that point. And then when we get down to women, you'll see that they're women, they're over 18 or over 21, and they're multiracial. And then when you get down to, where's the E's? Here's an E. All right, this is a young man who wouldn't be able to vote until after the Vietnam War. And there are a couple of those. And then there are, let's see, where's the F's? This one will never get to vote because she's too young yet. And this one, all right, she's 18. She belongs there. I need to, all right, here we have not a citizen. So that's when the very last group. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I just was thinking about the parallel structure and, that white, white, and then all of a sudden male with no color designation.
Right, because that's when all men were allowed to vote, no matter what color, no matter whether they own property or not. You'll see that as we go through it. Right. This particular document, if you're going to teach in person, these are the cards and they're 4 to a page, which is much better to do because they don't need to be large and you're not wasting so much paper. You can pick and choose. You can create your own. If you've only got 15, you can create your own document with them, but this is the size that you would want to use. All right. So I hope I haven't totally confused you, but I just wanted you to know that that was there. Now, for us, and this is where I'm making you my experimental group. All right, these are sample avatars, and we're going to be on the screen ourselves, and we're going to be turning screens off and on. So I'm going to assign these to you. So and again, I'm going to do it by alphabetical order. So Barbara Chait, I'm going to make you George, and he is a white man, 21 or older, owns property. And Candy, I'm going to make, so Barbara, this is your image in the upper left-hand corner. And Candy, I'm going to make this you. That's the same thing. All right. White man, 21 or older, and owns property. Chris, I'm going to make you this person. And he is a white man. He doesn't own property and he's 21. And Joan DeVore, I'm going to make you this man. Same thing. White man does not own property, but is 21 or older. Jill Drew, I'm going to make you this man. He is a male and 21 or older. Corey, I'm going to make you this person. He is, again, a man, 21 or older. Barbara Erickson, I'm going to make you this woman. And she is a woman and 21 or older. Robin, I'm going to make you this woman, woman 21 and older. Amy, I'm going to make you this woman, 21 and older. Barbara McCosker, same thing, woman, 21 and older. Let's see. I'm going to go up to this one. And Beth O'Connell, I'm going to make you that woman. All right, 21 and older. And Shoshana, I'm going to make you this woman, 21 and older. Um, Christine, I'm going to make you this. What am I going to make you? I'm going to make you this woman. Um, she is 18 and a woman, or and a citizen. All of the ones after the Civil War, or at the Civil War and after, also needed to be citizens. And then Deirdre, I'm going to make you this woman. And she is going to not be a citizen. And Elizabeth, Elizabeth, are you here? No. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to take the poor kid who will not be able to vote because he's way too young. All right. I'm going to go right back to here and I'm going to go to the module. Okay. If there's anybody that does not see a screen that says fighting for the vote suffrage timeline, please let me know if it's more than just the one, just Deirdre.
I can see that, but
Oh, okay. All right, good.
I can't see below the flag. I see 3 stars on the flag. Do I need the bottom part
That's
of that?
nope, that's all you need.
Okay.
That's all you need. All right. So go ahead. Yes.
Really quick question. What grade is this for?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. This is adaptable for anywhere from, I would say, 5th grade, because that's where we first taught it, but definitely
Okay.
middle school all the way up through college. What you would
Okay.
do is just take a look at it and say, okay, is there some vocabulary words I need to change, or do I need to
Right. Okay.
introduce whatever? But it is
Okay.
useful all the way up through adulthood once you get there. Okay, so when
Okay,
you
great.
start presenting this, the first thing that you should do, of course, is introduce yourself. And if you're from a League of Women Voters, please introduce the League as well. Say it began over 100 years ago when women were not allowed to vote yet. They fought for voting rights then, and we're still fighting for voting rights today. We are nonpartisan, which means that we don't take sides in politics. We don't tell people who they should vote for or what political party they should join. We do work to help people understand how important voting is and how to actually physically do it. The screen then shows the word suffrage, and we say, is suffrage a familiar term? And I will tell you that all the way up through college, there are kids who do not know what the word suffrage means. So I try to make them feel at ease. And I say, suffrage is a word that many people don't know, but what does it sound like? And you'll always get somebody who'll say it sounds like suffer. And you say, that's right. And it's interesting that it sounds like the word suffer because they're really from 2 different root words. But many people suffered and some people died in order to get the right to vote. The people who win elections make the laws. Voters decide who wins elections. People who do not have the ability to vote are without power. Those in office don't listen to them because they pay attention to the voices and the needs of those who will keep them in office. For this very reason, from the very birth of our nation, people have fought, they've gone to war, they've gone to jail, and they have actually died for the right to vote. I'm going to ask you to open your minds and to shift your perspective to see it the way they saw it. So this is the slide you change if you're not from New Jersey, obviously. But we ask the kids first to give us what they know about who can vote in New Jersey. And then we say, you're right. You have to be a citizen. You have to be 18 years or older. And in New Jersey, you have to reside in the county where you're voting for 30 days. And you can't be in prison on a felony conviction. This is a new thing in New Jersey. It's only 2 years old. 2 years ago, a law was passed that allowed returning citizens to register again on release from prison and to vote again. And we make the point to the kids that this differs state by state by state. It used to be 2 years ago in New Jersey that once you were in prison, you could never vote again. But the law was changed by the state, and now you can. There are places in the country where you can vote while you're in prison. And there are places like what New Jersey used to be where you can never vote again. And we're going to talk about how important states' laws are about the right to vote. So here's where I would give the cards. If I'm using cards and I'm in person, I would give the cards out to the students in the percentages that we just talked about, so that I've got the right number of kids with the thing. And then we start to tell the story. It's important to recognize that there were people on this land before the original colonies were established. But for our presentation, we're going to start with the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the United States as a nation. Prior to 1775, we were 13 colonies of England. Laws to control us were made by the Parliament in England. We couldn't vote. We had no representation in that Parliament, so we were powerless. We could not control our own country. As a result, we declared independence from England and started the Revolutionary War. And I'd like you to think about the Revolutionary War just a little differently than you probably have been. Yes, it was a fight for independence, but it was also a fight for suffrage, a fight for the right to make our own decisions about our own nation. So we won the war and we became an independent country, but we paid a really high price. 17,000 Americans died in the Revolutionary War, and many more were wounded and became prisoners of war. The Revolutionary War is an example of people dying for the right to vote. Robin, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add something because I remember the first time I saw this, I was very confused. And I just wanted to help maybe some other people who might be confused the way I was. You're looking at the slides, but Pat has a script that you use so that you actually have a script with the slide in it. You don't have to memorize
Right.
all these things that she's saying. I was like, it scared the heck out of me the first time I saw this, that I was going to have to memorize like this whole monologue, but it really is written all there for you. So we're kind of being the students right now, but if you're going to present it, don't think you have to memorize it and know it by heart because it freaked me out. That was like, okay, I'm running away. I'm not doing this anymore. But it's much easier than it seems. And of course, Pat doesn't need the script anymore because she's probably done it 67,000 times already.
Well, not quite
So
that
I
much.
just wanted to share that
I am
because
very
I
glad.
started to freak out again and I done this one.
Thank you. It's really helpful. And anybody who has a question or a comment through this, please feel free to jump in and say something. When we train kids to teach this, but we tell them, hold the script in your hand and read it. And what we do with the kids is train them how to read, not that they have to memorize this whole thing, but they need to put that emphasis in them. I just watched a group of kids from middle school, a Montessori middle school in Jersey City, do this like pros. We spent some time with them, helping them, develop the delivery skills that we would hope that most kids can can do. And they were amazing. And their classmates were there. It was the whole middle school that watched this or that participated, and the kids were glued to what their peers were saying. So Robin's right. I am reading to you directly from the script, and you can pick it up and you can put it in a binder or you can hold it in your hand, and it does not lose its power because you've got a piece of paper in your hand. So thank you, Robin. Okay. Okay, back to the story. And it is a story, so it's legitimate to hold something and read from it, right? Okay, so we won the war. And now we had to decide on the rules that would guide the new nation into the future. The 13 colonies had become 13 states. Each one had its own state government. There was no central government at that time to keep the states together. The founding fathers knew they didn't want a king. I mean, after all, they had just gotten rid of crazy King George III, so they didn't want that. So they knew they needed to define something new. A constitution was needed in order to clarify the roles of the central government and of the states. So the leaders of this new nation met and they argued, and I mean angrily at times, especially about the enslavement of people. To achieve a constitution that they could all agree to, they put off solving the issue of slavery. So these are the avatars that you have. And you might be tempted to think that now that everybody in the nation has participated and gotten the nation to be independent, that they would all have a say in what was going to happen. But not yet. Because when it came to the debate over who could vote, one of the things the founding fathers decided was not to define voting requirements at the federal level. They gave that responsibility to the states. And that's a theme that we're going to keep returning to again and again. Now, this particular slide is one that if I'm short on time and if I know I've got a 40-minute period instead of a 45 or a 50-minute period, I don't say this, but I think this is very prescient. This is something that John Adams said at the time that they were trying to make this decision. There will be no end to it. New claims will arise. Women will demand a vote. Lads from 12 to 21 will think their rights not enough attended to, and every man who has not a dime will demand an equal voice with any other in all acts of state. It tends to confound and destroy all distinctions and surrender all ranks to one common level. This is also something I probably wouldn't use with middle school, but I thought that was an amazing quote when I came across it. It was one of the women from Montana who shared that with us. So once the new nation finally had the Constitution, they needed to elect a president and a vice president. So they held the first election. So it's 1788. Who do you think can vote in this election? And you can just make sure that you're unmuted and then tell me what you think should be on this screen. What's one thing?
White man, 21 older and owns property.
Okay, you got them all. All right, so they need to be a man, white, 21 or older, and they needed to own property. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Yes.
More
Okay.
better.
All right. So I should see Barbara Chait and I should see Candy, but I shouldn't see Joan and I shouldn't see me. All right. So out of all of those people who were in this group, these are the two people who would be making the decisions for everybody else that was in this group to begin with. So Barbara and Candy, how do you feel about that?
I
Wow.
feel they're in very good hands.
I agree. I'm very comfortable with that.
All right, you two have an awful lot of power.
We
And
do.
those of us who have our screens turned off are not as powerful, and that doesn't always feel so good. So I'm going to show you what happens on the screen. That's what it would look like if we had 25 people here. Just those two people would be making all of those decisions. But let's move ahead. We've moved ahead about 60 years. And the westward expansion has taken place. The number of states went from 13 up to 32. And the population grew from 4 million, which was the case in 1790, to 23 million, which was the case in 1856. So when things like that happen, customs also change, and people didn't pay quite as much attention any longer to social position. They were more impressed by those people who had moved, the folks who had moved westward were more impressed with people who could survive and could cope with difficult circumstances. You also had the situation where former soldiers who had fought in two wars, the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, they started to push for suffrage because they had risked their lives on the battlefield. So why couldn't they vote? And men who had fought in the Revolutionary War finally won the right to vote. But interestingly, they had to do so state by state by state by state. Remember, the states had the authority.
Yeah.
And it was only when 3/4 of the states said, yes, the property requirements are over, that then it applied to everybody, everyone across the state. So in 1856, the last state, which was North Carolina, removed the requirement to own property. So at this point in time, who can vote? What do we need to cross off?
Property owner.
Property owner.
Right. All right. So again, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And what we should have are two people adding to the screen. So we should have Chris Corwin and Joan. At any rate, it's not that many more people. So let's go back to the screen and see what it looks like on this. If we had 25 people, this is what it would look like. There's still an awful lot of folks who are not being represented, even though they actually live here.
Mhm.
The next milestone is the Civil War. The right to vote is not mentioned in the Constitution, as I said, it's all the states' rights. And it wasn't until the end of the Civil War that the Constitution itself was amended to set the first nationwide rules about suffrage. And here's what happened. About the same time that the states were eliminating property work requirements as a voting requirement, the country was facing the biggest challenge in our history to that date, one that would have a profound effect on suffrage. In the mid-1800s, tensions between the South, which were slave states, and the North, which were free states, escalated. Northern states wanted any new states admitted to the Union to be free states, and Southern states wanted any new states to be slave states. The election of Abraham Lincoln brought those tensions to a head. The South withdrew from the Union and hostilities began. And between 1861 and 1865, America waged the bloodiest war in our history, the Civil War. The war was fought over the enslavement of people and the rights of African Americans. But in the end, it was also about suffrage. In 1865, the North won the war, the Union was saved, the enslavement of people ended, and African American men were given the vote. But the country paid in blood for this right. between 650,000 and 850,000 Americans died as a result of the war, more than in any war we fought. 620,000 Americans equaled 2% of the nation's population in 1860. That would be the equivalent of losing 6 million Americans today. We lost just over 1.1 during COVID, just as a reference point. 1 in every 4 soldiers who went to war did not come home. Freeing nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people also left really important questions. What rights did the newly freed African Americans have? Were the formerly enslaved people citizens? And if they were citizens, could they vote? 3 constitutional amendments answered those questions. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution passed, and it ended slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment made all people born in the United States, including the formerly enslaved, American citizens. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution provides that with a few discrete exceptions, people born in the United States are citizens of this country, irrespective of the race, ethnicity, or national origin of their parents. 2 years later, in 1870, the 15th Amendment changed the suffrage laws across the country. It gave African American males the right to vote. The 15th Amendment states that the rights of citizens to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 15th Amendment is the first time that the federal government steps in on the question of voting. So, who has the authority to decide who votes? Normally, it's the states. But this time, the first time, the federal government puts a limit on that authority. So what do we need to cross off now?
White.
Right. Okay. So again, stop the share. And if you are now a man and 21 years old or older, would you turn your screens on? Corey, are you still here?
No, she's
No,
not.
I see in the chat. She said she
Yeah,
had
in
to.
the chat, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so there should be one more face on the screen, so I'm going to add mine to it. Okay. All right. So again, compared to the 15 people who were on the screen originally, this is a very small percentage. And some of those people who are not on the screen, how come you're not on the screen and how do you feel about it?
Pretty bad.
Who are you?
I am a woman. I think I'm over 21, if I remember correctly, but the biggest strike against me is that I'm female.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in? Go
This
ahead.
is Candy. I just,
Okay.
when you had said 1865, unless I wrote it down wrong, you said all people born in the US are citizens. That meant all male, right?
No,
In
all people born in the United States are citizens. That's what the 14th Amendment promises. And you're going to hear that on the news, so remember it.
No,
It's
but
going
I'm
to
saying
come up.
if the African, because all people, I'm a person, and if I were alive then, I wouldn't have gotten it. Women didn't get it, and African
Citizenship.
American
Citizenship.
male.
Not the right to vote, but citizenship you did.
Yeah. That's the birthright citizen,
Right.
right?
Oh, so it's
That's
not
correct.
saying the right to vote, it's just
That's
saying that
correct.
you're citizens. Oh,
That's
okay, I've
correct.
got it. Thank you.
Joan?
Native Americans, that means they had the right to vote?
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
That's one of the things that made us have to change what we said in the show. But at this point in time, most kids don't ask that question.
Yeah.
You're much more perceptive, but most kids don't. The kids in Montana did because they knew.
Mhm.
But
In
that will come
Cumberland
up.
County, they might ask that question.
They might. They might. And if they do, I just say we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But for now, just leave your, stand up, be with the rest of them. Deirdre.
Okay. I am never going to vote. I'm a woman and a non-citizen.
I'm
So
sorry.
I'm not in it yet. So I'll just get my picture up
I'm
here.
so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slideshow again. And okay, so again, if we had the whole group of 25, this is what it would look like. It's still so small compared to what the population at the whole is. And it makes sense because half the population is women and all you see there are men. Okay, so then we move on to the 19th Amendment. And in the slideshow, I'm going to do something that you don't have to do. What Sanjana shares with you is all written in the script, so you can see it and you can read it yourself. But there are some young people who decided that they wanted to take part in this presentation, and Sanjana is one of them.
It is now 1920. It has been over 130 years since all white male citizens were given the right to vote. It's been more than 50 years since the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote, but women still have no
I'm
constitutional right to vote.
Stopping it.
Many women had learned that they could make their voices heard during the struggles to abolish slavery and reduce alcohol consumption. They discovered that they could speak in public and influence political decisions. They decided to try to gain the right for women to vote. They marched, gave speeches, and lobbied politicians. These women were called suffragists because they were fighting for their suffrage. Susan B. Anthony was one of the most famous suffragists. By the early 1900s,
Can you
a
hear
new
the sound now?
generation of women took up the fight. They wanted a constitutional amendment to say that states could not deny the citizens the right to vote based on sex. These women suffragists were unstoppable. They marched, they sued, they lobbied, they picketed outside the White House for more than a year through rain, cold, and blizzards. They were harassed, even by other women, many of whom did not want the vote. When President Woodrow Wilson lost his patience with their picketing, they were arrested. Some suffragists were arrested. They could have paid a small fine to be set free, but they chose to go to jail. They wanted their stories to be told. Some of the jailed suffragists refused to eat. They went on hunger strikes. They wanted people to know that they were willing to die to get the vote. The women on hunger strikes got thinner and thinner and weaker. They needed help to walk. Their pictures were in the paper, and President Woodrow Wilson, who refused to support a constitutional amendment for women's suffrage, was worried a suffragist might die. To make sure they didn't die, the starving suffragists were force-fed. They were strapped down, a rubber hose was pushed down their throat to their stomach, and liquid food was poured through the hose. Finally, after all these struggles, President Wilson gave in. He agreed to support the suffrage amendment, and the women were released from jail. The 19th Amendment, guaranteeing the woman the right to vote, was ratified and made into the law of the land in August 1920. However, let's remember that women of color would still have to fight for their vote long after the women's suffrage movement was over.
Okay, so as you heard, all right, these are the same images, and in the script are the words that Sanjana spoke. All right, so this time we need to cross off male. I'm going to stop sharing. And those of you who can vote at this point in time, would you please turn your screens back on? Woman 21 or older. Oh, that's looking a whole lot better, isn't it? But we're still missing a lot of people. Still missing people. So let's see what it would look like if we had the 25. Okay, so that's what it would look like. Much, much better. There are still a group of people who can't vote, but it is much more complicated. Yes, all women could vote after the 19th Amendment, but not all women or all men had the ability. Once the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, the work for minority groups was not yet done. While Black men and women had that legal right to vote, in reality, they couldn't. And as we will soon learn, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, Indigenous people, Latinas and Latinos had to continue to fight for full voting rights all the way to 1965 and beyond, with the passage of the Voting Rights Act that prohibited racial discrimination in voting. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen again and we can see who's here. I'm going to have to ask some of you to turn your screens back off. If your avatar happens to be a Black man or a Black woman, would you please turn your screen off? If your avatar happens to be Hispanic, would you please turn your screen off? If your avatar happens to be Asian, would you please turn your screen off? If your avatar happens to be Indigenous, Native American, would you please turn your screen off? If your avatar happens to be disabled, would you please turn your screen off? All right, and you can see that we are back down to 5 people, which was like what it was in 1856. There are a few differences in who's on the screen, but that is still what happened. All right, again, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you do it remotely. All right, so I'm asking people to sit back down. And there we have it, folks. When I'm doing teacher training, I usually stop here and ask people what their emotional reaction is. And it's usually pretty powerful. The fight for the vote encountered fierce resistance, and even today, it's still not over. We've seen how state laws and/or the Constitution itself have changed over 2 centuries to remove barriers to voting, to include the poor and non-landowners, to include African Americans and women's, but there is more to the story. Despite the trend towards greater suffrage, there has been consistent push in the opposite direction. As we've seen throughout our history, there has been powerful resistance to allowing certain groups to cast their votes, even when the law has given them this right. So even though we've worked through major milestones in the fight for the vote, we're not done. There are setbacks and breakthroughs that we need to talk about. The first setback to voting happened after the Civil War. There were places in the country where people went to extreme lengths to ensure that people of color did not vote. Local and state laws were passed that kept races separated and did everything possible to prevent Black citizens from voting. These were called Jim Crow laws. The word Jim Crow means racial segregation and discrimination enforced by laws, customs, and practices. Jim Crow laws removed the political and economic gains made by Black people following the Civil War. Jim Crow laws prevented Black citizens from voting and kept Black citizens out of the polls by using grandfather clauses, literacy tests, property requirements, removing names from voter lists for contrived reasons, poll taxes, preventing ex-convicts from ever voting again, and the threat of violence. Jim Crow laws were enforced until 1965. Punishment for defying Jim Crow laws was severe. Into the 20th century, men were lynched for trying to vote. While the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the anti-slavery movement, early suffragist leaders later split off from their alliance with abolitionists. And actually, I am going to stop sharing again and then let Amira Davis tell this, but I need to click that. Okay.
While the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the anti-slavery movement, early suffragist leaders later split off from the alliance with abolitionists. They were angry that under the 15th Amendment, Black men would get the vote while white women were still denied. When the 19th Amendment was up for debate, Southern politicians especially seethed over the prospect of enfranchising millions of African American women. The women suffragists faced a moral dilemma. Racist opposition in Congress have led to the defeat of suffrage for any woman. White suffragists turned their backs on the Black women who had also fought long for the right to vote. While technically the 19th Amendment gave Black women the right to vote, whites in the Jim Crow South knew all too well how to keep African American men from voting. Now they were going to keep Black women from the polls as well. 1920 and the passage of the 19th Amendment marked for Black women the start, not the end, of the fight for the right to vote, a fight which lasted until 1965 and the passage of the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts.
Okay, excluded from the franchise also were Native Americans, many of whom were not made U.S. citizens until 1924. With the signing of the Indian Citizenship Act. Until 1924, Native Americans were required to give up their tribal identities and their tribal rights and move off reservations in order to be considered a U.S. citizen and have the right to vote. So even though Native Americans had the right to citizenship and the right to vote in 1924, some states found ways to keep them from voting. They weren't guaranteed the right to vote until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Voting rights activist Gertrude Simmons Bonin, whose Indian name was Kalasa, of the Yankton Sioux Nation, was prominent in the women's suffrage community. She and other Native suffragists didn't want to only have U.S. citizenship. They simultaneously wanted recognition of their citizenship in tribal nations and their treaty rights, particularly to land. They wanted to use suffrage and U.S. citizenship to save their land and their communities. After the 19th Amendment was ratified, Bonin spent the next several years going to white women and saying, "Now you have the vote. Please fight for my people. Don't forget your Indian sisters."
Along with African Americans and Native Americans, other groups continued to be excluded from the vote. Asian American immigrants, who were long ineligible for naturalized citizenship on account of race, only won the vote starting in 1943. Among those advocating for both women's suffrage and immigrant rights was a young woman named Mabel Ping Hua Lee. She was about 5 when her family managed to immigrate from Canton, China to the United States. She was able to, in the 1900s, through a narrow exemption in the Chinese Exclusion Act. Starting as a teenager, no older than many of you, Lee became a powerful voice in the suffrage movement. People talked about her speeches and how the audience was Mabelized by her ability. White suffragists thought she was amazing, so much so they asked the 16-year-old Lee to march on horseback at the front of a major suffrage parade in New York City in 1912. It would take more than 20 years after the 19th Amendment ratification for Lee and other Chinese American immigrants to become eligible for citizenship and thus win the right to vote. It was not until 1943 and the passage of the Magnuson Act that Chinese immigrants could begin naturalizing as U.S. citizens. Truly broad access to American citizenship and voting rights was not available to Asians and Asian Americans until the Immigration and Nationality Acts of 1952 and the Civil Rights Act of 1965. These acts removed race as a barrier to immigration and citizenship, effectively ending 2 centuries of restrictions and legal disenfranchisement.
Okay, and that's an image of Mabel Pinawali. And literally, she marched at the head of the parade before women had the right to vote, and yet they had to wait so much longer as Chinese Americans, as Asian Americans, to actually gain the right to vote. So then we talked a lot about the 1960s and the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. The 1960s were years of social upheaval that included a national movement to end Jim Crow. Civil rights and voting rights champions like Martin Luther King emerged, and under their leadership and inspiration, Blacks and whites marched, demonstrated, held sit-ins, and risked their lives to stand for Black rights. White and Black civil and voting rights activists in the South were beaten, arrested, and some were killed. A man was murdered for registering Black voters. 4 young girls were killed when the church they attended, which was the Center for Civil and Voting Rights Meetings, was bombed. Dozens of activists were shot. But the activists continued to march and demonstrate. And on the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, state troopers attacked marchers with nightsticks, tear gas, and whips. The violence was shown on national television, and it shocked the nation and moved the president to act. On August 6, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. Now, this was a law, not an amendment to the Constitution. The law gave the federal government the right to review any changes to voting laws in southern states that had a history of voter suppression. It restored the ability to vote to groups that long held the legal right to vote, but were stopped due to voter suppression. So it's 1965, the one that we need to take off now? None. But now we can include Black women, Asian women, Indigenous people, and so on. But we're not over yet. There was another change to the Constitution about suffrage that happened in 1971 when the 26th Amendment to the Constitution lowered the voting age to 18. We've just seen that the fight for the vote in 2 of the 3 cases we covered involved war, the Revolution and the Civil War. The 26th Amendment indirectly involved war. Here's the background. Every male in the U.S., even today, is required to register with the Selective Service on his 18th birthday. That's still true. But at that time, America was fighting a war in Vietnam. To get the number of soldiers they needed, the military drafted soldiers from that pool of men who registered when they turned 18 with the Selective Service. Now, the Vietnam War was very unpopular with a large part of the American public. There were public protests against the war. Many Americans, especially the young, wanted to end our involvement. Of those who died during the war, over half were young men between the ages of 18 and 20. Half. Men who had no vote, no say in whether that war should be fought at all. The new soldiers were old enough to fight and die, but too young to vote. Protesters wanted to change that. And the 26th Amendment was passed more quickly than any other amendment in history, and 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. So what do we need to change now? We need to make it 18. And at this point in time, we should probably have almost everybody on the screen. And because I'm looking at the time, I'm just going to go on to that next screen. So this is what it would look like now at this point. So the people behind there and those of you on the who are not on screen would be younger than 18 or non-citizens, but we're much more representative now than we were in the past. However, the 1965 Voting Rights Act had something that was a little quirky. It allowed those Puerto Rican citizens who were living in Puerto Rico to vote using their Spanish language. But those who moved to the United States mainland were still denied. When they went to vote, they were given a literacy test. They were told, if you can read this, you can vote. If they couldn't read English, they couldn't vote. The inability to read and write English, as well as violence, gerrymandering, and intimidation, were still being used by states, particularly in the Southwest, to deny Latinos the right to vote. In 1974, the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Project, the first and largest nonpartisan Latino voter participation organization in the U.S., started operations. Willie C. Velasquez and other Mexican-American political activists led this. And on August 6, 1975, so exactly 10 years after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, President Gerald Ford amended the act to also end discrimination against so-called language minorities. Protecting the voting rights of Latinos as well as other non-English speaking groups made it possible to translate registration materials into other language, and it strengthened the political power of communities of color. But there was still one more group who faced barriers to voting. Lower turnout among people with disabilities was a result of barriers to the ballot box. Imagine using a wheelchair or a walker and not being able to enter your polling place because there was no ramp, or the doors were too narrow, or they were too hard to open, or that the pathway to the voting area was obstructed and lacked proper signage. Imagine being blind and encountering a voting machine that did not offer audio or large print ballots. Several federal laws now protect voting access for individuals with disabilities. The 1984 Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped mandated accommodations. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 provides a national mandate for eliminating discrimination against individuals with disabilities. And the Help America Vote Act of 2002 specifically provides that an accessible voting system must provide individuals with disabilities the same opportunity to vote privately and independently that others enjoy. Now things seem to be looking good. It seems like all U.S. citizens 18 and older can vote, but even today, things are not always perfect. Voter suppression continues. In some states, states removed names from voter rolls, and their reasons for doing so are not always valid. Often, a problem is not resolved in time for a person's vote to be counted. In some states, election officials shut down polling places in certain neighborhoods or cut back on the number of voting machines, and voters in those neighborhoods then have to wait for hours in line to cast a vote. Hard to do when you have to work. Some states require voters to show ID when they vote, and they require forms of ID that are difficult for certain populations to obtain. Some states require street addresses, for example, but what about the homeless? Some Native Americans living on reservations may not have street addresses. And some states require college students to have an in-state driver's license in order to register to vote. The fight for the right to vote continues today. A Supreme Court decision in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder, gutted the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court ruled that places with a history of suppressing voting rights no longer were suppressing votes. So states were no longer required to submit changes in their election laws to the U.S. Department of Justice. That decision opened the door for the return of rampant voter suppression practices. In her dissent, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously stated that gutting the Voting Rights Act when it was working was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you aren't getting wet. In other words, if it's working, why get rid of it? 5 years after that ruling, nearly 1,000 U.S. polling places had closed, many of them in predominantly African American counties. There were also cuts to early voting, purges of voter rolls, and imposition of strict voter ID laws. And since then, voting laws have continued to change across the nation. Some of them have been positive, but many of them have not. The League of Women Voters is here to help, and then you have the numbers. If you have time, there is a timeline that you can review afterwards. And then in most of the cases, when we go into schools or work with groups, we ask kids at the end to complete an exit ticket, and we have these printed on paper. You can do it online if you need to present remotely by asking people to write things in the chat, but it's much more effective to have those. I used to think, but now I think. Robin, do you want to speak to what those exit tickets are like?
Oh, they're the best part of the whole thing. It's just so amazing to see what 45 minutes or an hour, what a difference it can make in a student's perception of voting and the challenges to voting and the importance of voting and how you vote. I just love reading them.
Yeah, it really is. It's very, very powerful. So it's worth it's worth shortening the slideshow if you need to, and giving yourself time to get those exit tickets at the end. And it's also really good when you're trying to get into another school to say, these are some of the things that kids have said in the past about, the lessons that they've done. So it has a sales thing too. Excuse me. So that was long, and part of it was because I was clumsy with the technology, and I apologize for that. You'd think I'd never done it before. But also, there is a lot of wording in this. So you can see that if you've got a shorter class period, you do need to go back and you do need to consolidate what's there. Base it on what your constituency is. If you're with a group who needs to hear how the fight was after 1920, then make sure that you spend time on those groups that have been working since then, all the way up through 1965 and beyond. Otherwise, if you read it right from the beginning, I'm going to say it takes 45 or 50 minutes to do just the story part without the videos and all of that kind of thing. Yes, Amy.
So we saw this as an online activity where we blackened our screens, and so you got to visually see. If you were live in the classroom in person, and you're handing out those cards, and then do you have some stand up and some
Yes.
have to remain seated? Is that how you do
Yes,
it?
thank you, Amy. That's a really good question. I should have said that in the beginning.
Okay.
In person, they stand up when their avatar is ready to vote or eligible to vote. And then
Okay.
we let them sit down when the next part of the story goes, and then it builds. And so you begin to see them, more and more of the class standing up. And then when you say, all right, but I'm afraid if you're a Black woman or a Black man, I need to ask you to sit down, you start to see the people disappearing from the thing.
Right.
And it's
Okay.
very, very powerful. So,
Okay. Got
good
it.
question. Thank you. Anything else about that?
I have a question that's, well, let me just ask it. The John Adams quote, what's the context for that? Because it sounds like he was really advocating against a more universal suffrage.
He was.
And okay.
He
And
was.
I just think of, so poor Abigail, remember the ladies, was like spitting into the wind, huh?
Well, probably. But he did listen to her. I mean, he did at least have the a woman's voice in his ear from time to time. So who knows? It may have made a difference. But you're right. He was very very much in favor of just having the white, rich, educated men be the ones who made the decision because everybody else was too dumb to do it. So But that's, as I said, that's a slide that I would leave out if I was cutting things out. Okay, the lesson that follows that is the truth about turnout. And again, I'm going to go from the website. I think I am. All right, so we're on the website. We've gone to what do we do? The educators and community groups. Scroll down, and this time it's the truth about turnout. Same thing, training video and a view module. And again, you'll see that there are a couple of, like there are some state modifications, and then you'll see a folder that says excuses for not voting. This is a game, and the directions are there, and these are the cards that you would print out. On one side of each card, there is an excuse that was given by people in the 2016 election. I think it was 18 to 24-year-olds in the 2016 election for not voting. And then on the reverse side is one very good response to that. Not the only response, but a good one. So each one of the students is going to get one of these cards when we play the game. And I'll explain that when we get to it. But the module itself, again, has a slideshow and a script. And as Robin said, this is what the script looks like. So you have a picture of the slide that shows on the screen, and then you have the actual words that you can say. When you present in person, it's color coded. So anything that's in blue is what you would use if you were working in person. When you get to this slide, anything is in red is if you are doing it remotely. But here is the slideshow. And a caveat, the 2024 election results, when we created this, we used US Census data to for most of the slides that you would be using, most of the things that kids will be using. The US Census has not yet released their data for most of the things that we are including on the slides. So at the present time, these are only updated through the 2020 election. There are a couple of things that are good, but I'll tell you that as we go along. But it is more important, I feel, to be sure that we use consistent data that we know is absolutely reliable, rather than try to get some other data and put it in now and then have to change it later. All right. So the truth about turnout is a good follow-up to the timeline of suffrage, because one of the things we know about Gen Z and millennials is that they don't think their vote counts. And that part of the reason they don't think it counts is that they don't think there are enough of them to make a difference. And this is a slide that is a slideshow that's intended to show them that they do have power if they use it in power of numbers. If they haven't participated in the suffrage timeline, I use this slide to just kind of give them a really quick overview of how long it has taken to get the right to vote. But then this is where we really start. So right now on a piece of paper, what I'd like you to do is to write down the percentage that you think voted in the actual in the 2024 election. And these are the actual figures in this one. Okay, and then if you would just tell me what you put down. Barbara Chait, what did you put down?
60%.
Was that 50 or 60? I couldn't hear.
I think it might be 50, but I put down 60.
Okay, whichever, it's
Oh,
okay.
it's 60. Yeah.
Robin, how about you?
I said 59.
Jill?
I said 49.
Barbara McCosker?
I said 60.
Joan?
I said 30.
Okay, and I know that I'm missing some other people here. So there we go. Amy?
57%.
Okay. Who else am I missing? I know there are 9 of us, so we're missing 2 other people. No? Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you, we're going to try to figure out who is the closest. Okay, 63.7. Who was close?
I think Barbara, if she really said 60.
I did say, I really did.
I'm happy to be wrong.
There's a part of me though that feels like it, that it had to be different.
Okay, now when I do this in person in a classroom, what I will do is I'll have the kids write this down on a piece of paper. I have little sticky notes that I carry with me all the time. So if they don't have paper or pencil, I've got it. So they've got to write it down because then they've committed it to paper. And then I start by saying, all right, how many people said that it was 75% or higher? And you may get a couple. How many people said it was 40% or lower? And you may get a couple of people who say, okay, you folks need to sit down. So now you got that middle group left. And then you narrow it down like, who's 70, whatever I said, 70%, 60 to 70, who's 40 to 50, and then you finally get down to somebody who's the 63. And then I've got some kind of prizes. And I usually give it to several kids who are the closest to that just to make it fun. So that's a good way to get them up and active and interactive right in the beginning. Okay, so we've talked about how important it is to vote, to have your voice heard. So let's look at who's voting and whose voice is being heard. So this is the activity then, and then it says, right, if I'm standing in a classroom again, I say, okay, that is about 1/3 and 2/3. So I use my hands and I visually divide the class and say, all right, you 1/3, you didn't vote at all. So all of you, the 63.7%, are making all of the decisions, and those decisions affect that 1/3 too. It wasn't always that way. In 2016, think about that, only 55% of the vote of people in the country voted. And elections matter. Elections matter because there are issues that we care about. Immigration is one. The environment is one. These are all things that kids before you have said. Guns are one. Do you care about gun rights or do you care about gun control? Taxes are one. Do you think they should be raised? Do you think people who are rich should get a bigger break, or do you think people who are poor should get a bigger break? War. Do you think we should go to war or don't go to war? Healthcare, education, and there are plenty of other issues. Elections matter. The people who are elected make the decisions on those issues. And the people that they're going to pay attention to are the people who voted them into office and who will vote for them again or not vote for them again. So in New Jersey, who can vote? And again, this would be changed, but we've gone through this before. Okay. Now, what we're going to do today is to look at a series of graphs, and we're going to make some interpretations of those graphs. And in order to do that, I want to make sure that you really understand some of the tricks that people can play when you read a graph. So I need to stop sharing for a second again because I forgot to click that little button. Now I can do it. All right, so please pay attention and think about this as we're going through some of the rest of the graphs that we have. There we go.
A toothpaste brand claims their product will destroy more plaque than any product ever made. A politician tells you their plan will create the most jobs. We're so used to hearing these kinds of exaggerations in advertising and politics that we might not even bat an eye. But what about when the claim is accompanied by a graph? After all, a graph isn't an opinion. It represents cold, hard numbers, and who can argue with those? Yet, as it turns out, there are plenty of ways graphs can mislead and outright manipulate. Here are some things to look out for. In this 1992 ad, Chevy claimed to make the most reliable trucks in America using this graph. Not only does it show that 98% of all Chevy trucks sold in the last 10 years are still on the road, but it looks like they're twice as dependable as Toyota trucks. That is, until you take a closer look at the numbers on the left and see that the figure for Toyota is about 96.5%. The scale only goes between 95 and 100%. If it went from 0 to 100, it would look like this. This is one of the most common ways graphs misrepresent data, by distorting the scale. Zooming in on a small portion of the y-axis exaggerates a barely detectable difference between the things being compared. And it's especially misleading with bar graphs, since we assume the difference in the size of the bars is proportional to the values. But the scale can also be distorted along the x-axis, usually in line graphs showing something changing over time. This chart showing the rise in American unemployment from 2008 to 2010 manipulates the x-axis in two ways. First of all, the scale is inconsistent, compressing the 15-month span after March 2009 to look shorter than the preceding 6 months. Using more consistent data points gives a different picture, with job losses tapering off by the end of 2009. And if you wonder why they were increasing in the first place, the timeline starts immediately after the US's biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression. These techniques are known as cherry picking. A time range can be carefully chosen to exclude the impact of a major event right outside it. And picking specific data points can hide important changes in between. Even when there's nothing wrong with the graph itself, leaving out relevant data can give a misleading impression. This chart of how many people watch the Super Bowl each year makes it look like the event's popularity is exploding. But it's not accounting for population growth. The ratings have actually held steady because while the number of football fans has increased, their share of overall viewership has not. Finally, a graph can't tell you much if you don't know the full significance of what's being presented. Both of the following graphs use the same ocean temperature data from the National Centers for Environmental Information. So why do they seem to give opposite impressions? The first graph plots the average annual ocean temperature from 1880 to 2016, making the change look insignificant. But in fact, a rise of even half a degree Celsius can cause massive ecological disruption. This is why the second graph, which shows the average temperature variation each year, is far more significant. When they're used well, graphs can help us intuitively grasp complex data. But as visual software has enabled more usage of graphs throughout all media, it's also made them easier to use in a careless or dishonest way. So the next time you see a graph, don't be swayed by the lines and curves. Look at the labels, the numbers, the scale, and the context, and ask what story the picture is trying to tell.
Okay, and then at this point, we take a look at some graphs so that we, as the presenter, can be sure that the kids are understanding that. So in this graph, take a look at the x-axis, or at the y-axis. You can see that it uses one of the things that was talked about in that video. This one starts at 30% and goes up to 65%. How would the graph look different if it went from 0 to 100? And then we wait for kids to give the answers. And I'm going to go through this because I know we're short on time and I want to make sure that you get to the part where you use the graphs. And then we ask kids to tell us one thing they can know for sure by looking at this. And they'll come up with some things and we have them posted on a whiteboard. One thing they can know for sure is that in 1964, it looks like about 48% of the population turned out in a midterm election, and that was pretty high. But one thing they can also know for sure is that there's a big difference between turnout in a presidential election and turnout in a midterm election. So we get some things they can know for sure, and then we say, all right, let's see if you can make some assumptions. Like there are variations in that graph. What do you think might have been going on here when there was, a big change? What do you think might have been going on here? And we look across the bottom, and what do you know? This is 1916, 1922. Guess what was going on in here? Women were getting the right to vote. All right, so what kind of assumption might you make? And we guide them through a couple of things so that they know the difference between something they can say with certainty by looking at the graph, like this is 62% in 1916 or 63%, and something that they would be making some judgments about. This is another one that we can use to do the same kind of thing. So you can pick and choose which graph you want to use. And getting the new data for, well, this was not so new, but 2022, this really stuck out to me because we had been teaching kids about trend lines. And we didn't have the 2022 data when only a quarter of the population turned out to vote. And it turns out that that's really an anomaly. So the thing they can know for sure is that it was 35.5% of the population of 18 to 24-year-olds that turned out, but that was unusual. And what was going on at that period of time is a judgment that they can make. So the idea is to get them to understand the difference between things that are quite certain by looking at the graph and things that they are making assumptions about, because they're going to use that. And then we go on. So who has the power of the vote? Well, we're going to go through a series of graphs, and you're going to look. This is the 0 to 100% is at the left, and this is covering years from 2000 up to 2024. And this is the one piece of data that I could get from Circle, which is a reliable source. And I've only included it, and I would only say it by saying that that is not the same data that has been used in the rest of the chart. But we were trying to show that there was a decline in voter population among 18 to 24-year-olds. All right, so this is 18 to 24-year-olds. This line shows the voter turnout for presidential elections by 25 to 44-year-olds. This shows it from 45 to 64-year-olds. And this shows from 65-year-old to 74-year-olds. All right, so looking at those, what I'd like you to do is on a piece of paper, jot down for yourself one thing you can know for sure by looking at this graph, and then one assumption that you might make. Okay, we're going to go on to another set. This is race and ethnicity. These graphs, again, are from 2000 to 2020, and the graph here goes from 0 to 100%. The blue line represents the turnout of white voters in presidentials. The red line shows the turnout of Black voters. There's something really interesting about this graph, too, that I'll tell you about afterwards. The gray line represents Hispanic voters.
That's it. Okay.
And the yellow line represents Asian voters. Again, write down one thing you can know for sure by looking at these, and one assumption you might make. Okay, and this is by level of education. Now, this graph, when I made these, I didn't realize it. They're a pain in the butt to try to make, but they will be changed because this graph is wrong. So this is only 30 to 100%, but the others that overlay this will go from 0 to 100. So you will see where that blue line actually lies. But this is less than high school. And now you can see how that changed the appearance of the line. Now this adds high school graduates who turned out. This line adds those who have some college up through having a college degree, a bachelor's degree. Okay, and then online, what we would normally do would be to put people into breakout rooms, but in a classroom, we break them into groups of 3 or 4. And we ask them to share with one another what they've written down as their know for sure and what they've written down as their assumptions. And one of the things that when I mentioned that slide that had racial differences, that slide was changed about 3 years ago to represent the number of years that kids would have likely been alive during presidential elections. And prior to that, it had been 100 years. When we narrowed it down to just the last, well, from 2000 on, it looked as if the black and the white vote just kind of switched places back and forth, back and forth. And if you had looked at it with 100 years, it was only a blip of 2008 and 2012 when that changed. So that's one of the things that you might get as an assumption that would come across. But at any rate, I know I'm rushing and I'm sorry about that, but you have the kids talk with one another. We usually give them about 3 minutes to do this because everybody has a chance to share. And then we say to them, all right, as a group, come up with one statement that tells what the basic premise is that all of you agree to, that based on those slides. And then you have a spokesman tell them. And what they come up with is essentially, so who's making the decision right now? Turns out that historically, if you're old, if you're white, and if you're well educated, it's more likely that you will vote, and therefore you have the power today. So if you don't vote, no power. So voter turnout turns out to be a really big deal. And if you want politicians to make the decisions that you want them to make, because your world is going to be very different from my world as an old person, you have to get involved. You have to begin to elect people who reflect your values. Is there change ahead? This part of the presentation is also updated. This information itself came from Circle, and it was about it was from 2022. And it was saying that in this past election, the one that just happened, there would be 41 million new Gen Z voters who would be eligible to vote. 8 million of those would be new since 2022. And nearly half of those would be people of color. The popular vote count in 2024, so this most recent election, the popular vote for Kamala Harris was 75,017,626. The popular vote for Donald Trump was 77,301,997. That's a difference of 2,284,371 votes. So 2.3 million roughly. Look at the number of Gen Z voters who were eligible to vote in 2024. 41 million. The last election was won by just over 2 million votes. Do you have power? You bet you do. This shows, and this is one of the other ones that you can hide or not hide, but this shows the percentage of voters who will be the majority. So in 2020, 18 to 20, the Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and then the millennials. So up through about the age of 18 to 40. Though in 2020, that was 41.5% of the population. In this one, 48.5% of the population. And in the next presidential election, that age group will be the majority. And 2/3 of those people will be people of color. If they turn out to vote, that's who's going to be making the decisions. You, and we say this to the kids, so you are the ones who are most likely to influence others your age to vote. And how can you do that? Well, we need you to help people register to vote. We need you to help them make a plan. We need to have you remind them of election day. And we need to have you use psychology on them. Use psychology? What, me? All right. So here are some things that you can do. And what we know is based on human behavior. The first thing you want to try to do is to make it seem like the norm because people want to fit in. You can say something like, we're all going to the polls together, then going out for pizza. Come on with us. Why does it work? Because human beings are motivated to do what others around them do. And we know that voters who hit the polls were 8.1% more likely than a control group that didn't get asked or didn't have people encourage them to participate. The second thing you can do is to have, we say call them names, but you want them to think about being something, not just doing something. So we ask them to call a person a voter instead of asking them if they're going to vote. Why does it work? Because deep in our brain, there's a difference between voting and being a voter. Voting is a one-time action. Being a voter is a part of your identity. It implies that you're an upstanding citizen, politically conscious, socially active, and or patriotic. And when people perceive those as valuable things and they want to be thought of as any of those things, they'll react more and do more if you call them a voter and not just ask them to vote. What can you do? You can watch your language and you can say, you're a voter, aren't you? Another thing you can do is address their commitment issues. Help them to make a plan. Why does it work? Well, I don't know about you, but I always say in New Year's Day, I'm going to exercise more, but I fail to follow through, or I'm going to budget better, but I fail to follow through. Well, this happens to people on election day too. They'll say they'll vote, but then they'll forget, or they won't find the time. We're more likely to translate goals into actions if we make a concrete plan. So what can you do? You can help them do that. You can say, are you going to vote in person or vote by mail? Or do you have your vote by mail ballot? Or what time are you going to the polls and how are you getting there? And then the fourth thing is promise you'll follow up because nobody likes to let a friend down. Say something like, I'll text you on election day or send me a picture of you voting for the first time. And then that's much more likely to make them follow up. So why don't some people vote? And this is where that game with the excuses comes in. Each one of the kids in person is given one of those cards with the question on one side or the excuse on one side rather, and then the good response on the other side. And we ask them to memorize the response to their question. And they're going to be asked to read their question to somebody else. So we give them a minute to really think about it. And then we pick somebody at random. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute so I can talk to you. So we pick somebody at random to read their card first. So I've got a card here that says, I have a disability and I can't make it up the steps to the polling place. All right, so I'm telling this. Now I ask all the kids in the class, okay, I pick you, and they pinpoint somebody and they say, give me a good answer to that. So I have a disability and I can't make it up the steps to the polling place. Amy, how would you answer that?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Anybody want to help her out?
I'd say get a vote by mail ballot.
Okay, that's a good one. Joan?
I would think that, well, maybe this is a little too complicated, but my thought is that most polling places will have ramp access if that's what the issue is.
Okay, there is actually law that requires them to do that. So when my question was answered by a couple of kids in the class, I would say whatever I would need to fill in to what you do. Yes, voting by mail is one option, but there's also law that requires the polling place to be accessible to you. And then you can fill in with other things too. I mean, that just happens to be what's on my card. Then, Amy, since I put you on the spot, you would get a card and you would have the answer on the other side that you would have mentioned. So Your excuse is, I just plain forgot it was election day, so I didn't vote. So you can put somebody else on the spot. How would they answer that?
Oh, you mean I have to choose somebody?
Yeah, you can put somebody on.
Oh, okay, I don't know. Jill.
Oh, well, the problem is if the election's over, there's not much you can do about it. But you need to mark it on your calendar or set an alarm on your phone or something like that. Or again, vote by mail.
Okay.
Get it done and over. Or early voting. Early
Oh,
voting.
see,
Right now,
all of
available.
this is coming up like it percolates up.
Yeah.
Yes. And if in a classroom, it might not be Jill that comes up with all of those things. It would be Jill and then somebody else and somebody else. And then Jill, you would get the next question. And what you see in a classroom is lots of giggles, and they will, pick on their friends and really put them on the spot, and everybody's laughing about it. So what you can use that game to take up as much time or as little time as you want at the end of the class period. But what happens is that every kid walks out with at least one answer to one question or one excuse that people might give. I give a set of those to the teacher when I'm done, because as a teacher, and those of you who are know, there are times at the end of a class when you've got 2 minutes left and you don't want to start on the next part of the lesson. Having one of those cards, you can pull it out and say, okay, here's an excuse, and let's have a discussion about it and see what we can come up with as the answer. And I've had teachers use those, so that's good.
Did we see the whole thing basically?
Pretty much. You just didn't, what you didn't see was people working in groups, people taking the time to, come up with a statement and those kinds of things. And then
Oh,
you
okay.
see the game in actual operation where you could have 10 people do this,
Okay.
for-
Okay.
so the slides, there are many, many slides in this one. If I go back and show you the film strip part of it, but there are probably 50 slides in this one, but that's because those graphs build. So you've got like 5 or 6 slides for each of the categories. You don't have to worry because you see it and it looks huge. It actually goes pretty quickly. You don't want to belabor those slides. You want to see people see it build, 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 and then think. So,
I have a
Pat,
question
can I
about
ask a
the
question?
graph slides.
yeah.
So they show the percentage of that category that votes. So 75% of people between 65 and 74 vote
Of the eligible voters.
of the eligible voters vote. But that says how many of them vote. It doesn't really say how large that population
Exactly.
is.
Exactly.
So, right. So don't you have to kind of like explain that? Because that was a lot of discussion. This election is, yeah, 100% of this group votes, but it's like such a tiny little group.
Right. It's all us old people that are dying off.
Right. I just want to make sure I understood what the graph
Yes.
was versus not exactly what somebody might think it is.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that sometimes comes up when they're discussing the assumptions that they can make. Because
Gotcha.
they say, that looks like it's, right across the board and it's high all the time. But you're talking about a much smaller part of the
Right. Okay.
population than you are when you're thinking of 18 to 24-year-olds, for example.
Mhm.
So,
So that's what I thought it was trying to say, but it's easy to assume because you have a higher percent of a certain group voting that that's a bigger number of people voting.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Good. Somebody else had a question. I heard two voices at the same time.
This is Candy.
Hi, Candy.
I was wondering if the one graph that jumped out at me was when the black vote went over the white vote, and it just said to me, we need more candidates like Obama. That's what rang out to me. Did you get that in any of the high school feedback, like that they picked up on that
They
was a
did. They did, particularly where there were large groups of kids of color. They say, oh, those are the 2 years that Obama was running. And that's
okay.
why I said to you that when we had that graph and it was 100 years, the graph, it was like black and white vote like this right across. And then there was 2008 and 2012, and it went like this, and the black vote exceeded the white vote. But you don't see that when you look at 2000 to 2020. It's really interesting how it can skew your perception of history. So.
You can, as the, from being from corporate America, they'd have an expression, you can prove anything you want with metrics.
Yes, yes. And that's why I think it's really important for kids to have the experience of using these graphs and learning that graphs can be misleading, that you have to be really careful when you're interpreting the information that comes from it. And if they walk out just remembering that, I will be very happy. If they walk out remembering that and saying, hey, if I vote, if I can get my friends to vote, we're really going to have the power. That's even better. But we'll see what happens. At this point in time in New Jersey, my goal this year is to get people out to vote in the governor's election, in the primary, as well as in the general election, because it's going to be a really interesting year here.
Oh, yeah.
But at any rate, all right. So it is 9 o'clock. My clock just rang, so I will let you go unless there are more questions. I'm willing to hang on for a bit.